What kind of woman jokes about her marriage in front of her ex and expects her husband to laugh? How does a few careless words at a family party turn into legal papers in her hands? I thought I was showing confidence, proving I wasn't afraid of temptation. But that night, one glance at my husband's face showed me exactly what I'd broken. I used to think flirting was harmless, just small talk, smiles, a way to remind myself I was still interesting. After all, I wasn't doing anything wrong. Not really. I was married, not dead. That's what I always told myself, and everyone laughed when I said it. Even Jonas used to laugh at first, but somewhere along the way, he stopped finding it funny. My name is Iris, and for 10 years I thought I was the lively one in our marriage, the one who kept things light. Jonas was quiet, steady, the type who double-checks receipts and remembers birthdays without ever making a fuss. People liked him, but no one ever noticed him the way they noticed me. I was the one who filled rooms, who told stories, who made people smile. That was my role. Then my ex, Evan, came back into town. I hadn't seen him in years, not since before Jonas and I got serious. When my mother-in-law planned a big family party at the community hall, Evan happened to be invited through mutual friends. I thought it would be funny. Just a bit of nostalgia, nothing more. Jonas told me to be careful, said people might talk. I told him he was being dramatic. It's strange, looking back now, how certain I sounded when I called him insecure. The night of the party, I wore a red dress I hadn't touched in years. Jonas said I looked nice but didn't smile when he said it. I remember brushing it off, saying he should be grateful people still thought his wife turned heads. He didn't answer. I thought he was sulking. I had no idea that was the last time he'd ever look at me the same way. It started small, a few jokes with Evan, a toast, some teasing about old memories. People laughed, and I felt powerful again, like the version of myself I missed. Jonas stood nearby, quiet as always. I thought his silence meant he was being stoic, but when I finally glanced at him across the table, the look in his eyes stopped me cold. It wasn't anger. It was something emptier, like he was already gone. I told myself I'd fix it later. I told myself he'd calm down. But as it turns out, some things can't be laughed away, not even by someone as charming as me. Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible stories. The morning of the party, everything felt ordinary. The sunlight came through the curtains, soft and steady. Jonas was already up, making coffee, scrolling through his phone. I poured myself a cup and asked if he was excited for the evening. He said, without looking up, that he wasn't sure excited was the word. I asked what he meant. He said, "You know who's going to be there." I knew he meant Evan. I laughed, maybe too loud. I told him he was being paranoid, that Evan and I were ancient history. He said it wasn't about jealousy, it was about respect. I said that sounded old-fashioned. He said, maybe respect is old-fashioned now. The way he said it annoyed me. I told him he should try trusting me once in a while, instead of acting like my father. That shut him up. He just took his coffee and went outside to water the plants. When I got to work, I couldn't help but tell my co-worker Nina about it. She said all men got nervous when old flames showed up, that it meant they still cared. I told her Jonas didn't seem nervous. He seemed judgmental. She laughed and said, maybe I should remind him what he's lucky to have. I smiled at that. Maybe she was right. At lunch, I checked my phone. Evan had liked one of my photos, an old one from our vacation last summer, me standing by the sea in a sundress. It was innocent, but my heart jumped anyway. I told myself it was just funny timing. I texted Nina about it, and she replied with a winking emoji. I didn't answer. That evening, Jonas came home early. He'd changed into a crisp shirt and was ironing his sleeves when I walked in. I told him he didn't need to look so tense. It was just a party, He said, "I'm not tense. I just want to get through it without being embarrassed." I told him no one was going to embarrass him. He didn't reply. We drove in silence most of the way. I kept checking my reflection in the window, smoothing my hair, reapplying lipstick. When we arrived at the community hall, it was already buzzing, laughter, chatter, the hum of music. I spotted Evan near the buffet, surrounded by people, smiling that same easy smile I used to fall for. For a moment, it felt like no time had passed. I went over to greet him. Jonas followed a few steps behind, polite but distant. Evan hugged me in that casual public way, quick but close enough to make Jonas's jaw tighten. I pretended not to notice. We started reminiscing, talking about stupid college stories. People around us laughed, and I felt the old thrill of being the center of attention again. I joked that Jonas had probably never seen me like that, carefree and fun. When I glanced at him, he was standing by the drink table, talking quietly to his sister, Mira. She was watching me too, her face unreadable. I told myself she was jealous of my confidence. Evan poured me a drink and raised his glass. "To old times," he said. I laughed and clinked mine against his. A few people nearby cheered. Someone, I didn't see who, pulled out a phone, probably recording. I leaned in to whisper something to Evan, just a joke, but the room had gone quieter than I expected. When I looked up, Jonas was staring straight at us. His expression wasn't angry. It was worse than that. It was calm, hollow. I mouthed something like, "Relax," but he turned and walked toward the door. Mira followed him out. I felt a flicker of guilt but pushed it down. I told myself he was overreacting, that he'd come back once he cooled off. A few minutes later, Evan excused himself, saying he needed some air. I stayed behind, trying to laugh with the others, pretending I hadn't noticed the shift in the room. When I finally went outside, the air was cool and sharp. The parking lot was half empty, and I saw Jonas standing by the car, hands in his pockets. I called his name, but he didn't answer. I said he was acting ridiculous, that it was just harmless fun. He looked at me then, really looked, and said quietly, "You always say that." Then he got in the car and shut the door. The sound of it closing echoed across the lot, louder than it should have been. For the first time that night, I felt something like fear. Headlights flash across the pavement as his car door locks with a dull click, leaving me standing outside in the dark. I didn't sleep much that night. The sound of the car door closing replayed in my head like a loop. When I finally drifted off, I woke again to the sound of him moving around downstairs. By morning, Jonas had already left for work. His side of the bed was cold, and there was no note on the counter, no coffee waiting. I told myself he was still upset, that he'd calm down after a day or two. He always did. At the office, Nina waved me over. She already knew about the party. Somehow everyone did. She said a cousin of hers had seen a short clip online, me clinking glasses with Evan, smiling, saying something about the good old days. I felt my stomach drop. I asked who posted it. She shrugged, said probably someone from the family. I laughed it off, pretending it didn't bother me. Inside, I was burning. Around noon, my phone buzzed with a message from Mira. "Maybe think before you make a joke next time." I stared at it for a long minute, then typed back, "You should mind your own business." She didn't reply. When I told Nina, she said Mira had always been jealous of me, that women like her hated women who could hold attention. I believed that for about 5 seconds before I realized it didn't make me feel any better. I texted Jonas asking if we could talk that night. Hours passed, no answer. Around 5, he finally replied, "Busy. We'll talk when I'm ready." The words stung more than I expected. Usually he'd at least soften things. Maybe a sure or a later. This time it felt formal, almost professional. When I got home, the house was spotless. His jacket was on the hook, his laptop open on the table. I could see a spreadsheet on the screen. Columns neatly labeled, household, expenses, notes. It looked like something for work, but something about it felt too personal. I wanted to ask what it was for, but he wasn't home yet. I poured myself a glass of wine and scrolled through my phone. The video had spread further than I thought. Someone had captioned it, "Wife flirts with ex while husband watches." I read the comments, each one worse than the last. Poor guy. She looks proud of it. This is why men stop trusting anyone. I threw my phone onto the couch and stared at the wall until I heard the garage door open. When Jonas came in, he looked exhausted, still in his work clothes. He said hello to our son Liam, helped him with his homework and didn't even glance at me. I told myself he was just cooling off. After Liam went to bed, I followed Jonas into the kitchen and said we needed to talk. He didn't stop moving, he just kept rinsing a plate. I said I didn't understand why he was so angry. He said he wasn't angry, just disappointed. I told him that was worse. It sounded rehearsed. He said he'd had time to think about things. I asked what things meant. He said everything. I tried to laugh, said he was being dramatic, that no one cared about a little dancing and laughter. He said they cared enough to record it. I said that was their problem, not ours. He turned off the tap, dried his hands, and looked at me in a way that made my stomach drop. "It's not theirs anymore," he said. "You made it everyone's." I snapped back, said he was just embarrassed because people were finally paying attention to me instead of him. The moment the words came out, I regretted them. He didn't answer. He just walked past me, up the stairs and into the guest room. I followed him, still talking, still trying to get the last word. He shut the door quietly. No slam, no argument. That silence hurt more than shouting ever could. I stood outside the door for a long time, listening. No movement, no sound, just the creak of the floor beneath my feet. Eventually, I went back downstairs and poured another glass of wine, telling myself I hadn't done anything wrong. Later that night, while cleaning up, I found his phone charging in the kitchen. The screen lit up with a new notification. Calendar alert, downtown 10:15. I frowned. He rarely had meetings outside work hours. I picked up the phone, but it was locked. I put it back, went upstairs, and stared at the closed guest room door. For the first time since the party, I felt something unfamiliar. Not guilt exactly, but dread. The soft click of his study door locking echoes down the hallway as his phone screen goes dark again. By the weekend, everyone seemed to know. My phone kept buzzing with messages I didn't want to open. A distant cousin had posted the video again with a new caption. Some people never grow up. Even my mother called, saying she'd heard something uncomfortable from Diana. I told her it was exaggerated, that Jonas was fine. She said his silence in the background of the clip said otherwise. I tried to act like it didn't matter. I went grocery shopping, held my head high, smiled at people who stared too long. But when I got to the checkout, the cashier, a woman I'd chatted with for years, gave me that small, polite look of pity. It made my hands tremble as I passed her my card. On the way out, I caught sight of myself in the glass door. My reflection looked unfamiliar, nervous, defensive. I hated it. When I got home, Jonas was in the living room, laptop open again, papers spread out neatly on the coffee table. I asked what he was doing. He said, "Just sorting things." I asked, "Sorting what?" He said, "Responsibilities." His calmness made my skin prickle. I told him this had gone far enough, that we looked ridiculous avoiding each other. He said, "We already look ridiculous to everyone else." I tried to spin it, said the internet moves fast, people will forget by next week. He didn't answer. He just highlighted something on a spreadsheet and typed a few words. I walked closer and saw headers, bills, schedule, custody. My stomach dropped. "Why are you writing this down?" I asked. He said, "Because I like to have records." That word, records, stuck in my head. I laughed, too loud, said he was making it sound like a police report. He said nothing. I told him he was being childish, punishing me for being more outgoing than him. He finally looked up. You think this is punishment? I'm just planning for what's next. I didn't understand what he meant, but the way he said it made my throat go dry. That night, we attended his cousin's birthday dinner. I didn't want to go, but he said it would look worse if we didn't. The restaurant was crowded, full of relatives whispering behind menus. I smiled, pretending not to notice. Mira sat across from me, her arms folded. When I tried to make small talk, she asked, "Are you going to make another toast tonight?" The table went silent. I forced a laugh and said maybe later, if the wine was good enough. No one laughed back. Jonas stayed calm, cutting his food, nodding when people spoke to him. At one point, Diana leaned over and said quietly, "You've embarrassed him enough, Iris." I said I didn't need a lecture. She said, "Then stop giving us reasons to speak." I felt my face burn. After dinner, I walked ahead to the car, blinking back angry tears. When Jonas joined me, I said he should have defended me. He said, "From what?" I said, "From your family's judgment." He said, "They only said what I didn't." We drove home in silence. Halfway there, I reached for his hand, but he didn't move his. His eyes stayed on the road, calm and steady. "Jonas," I said, "I made a mistake, okay? But it was just flirting. It didn't mean anything." He said, "Everything means something when it's public." When we got home, he went straight upstairs. I sat in the dark living room for a while, scrolling through comments again, punishing myself. Someone had paused the video and zoomed in on my face, laughing, leaning close to Evan. The caption read, "She's proud of breaking him." My chest hurt reading it. I shut off my phone and looked toward the stairs. I could see the faint line of light under the guest room door. I wanted to knock, to say something real this time, not another excuse. But before I could, I heard the faint whir of the printer again. Paper sliding out, one sheet at a time. I walked halfway up the stairs and stopped, listening. When it went quiet, I whispered his name, but he didn't answer. I went back down, pacing the floor until the clock struck midnight. That's when I noticed a new envelope on the kitchen counter. It was blank except for one word written on the corner. Household. I picked it up, hesitated, then set it back down. I couldn't open it. I told myself it was nothing. Just more lists, maybe another one of his spreadsheets. But in the morning, the envelope was gone. I checked the counter, the trash, the table. Nothing. When Jonas came down, dressed for work, I asked where it went. He said, "You'll see soon enough." Then he walked out, leaving his coffee half finished. The printer hums again as the front door closes, a single page sliding out with the faint label, Downtown 10:15. Sunday morning started with my mother calling. She said she'd heard from Diana that things were strained. I said we were fine, just tired, and she said I should stop pretending before it got worse. Her tone made me angry, like she already picked a side. I told her people were making something out of nothing. She said, "You humiliated him in front of family, Iris. That's not nothing." I hung up before she could say more. Jonas was in the kitchen when I came down. He was dressed neatly, even though it was Sunday, sitting at the table with his laptop open. I asked if we could go for a drive later, clear the air. He said he had things to finish. I said it felt like he was avoiding me. He said, "You mistake space for avoidance." I wanted to scream, but his calm made me feel childish. Later that afternoon, we took Liam to the park. It was supposed to be normal, a family day. The weather was warm, kids running everywhere. I sat on the bench scrolling through my phone while Jonas pushed Liam on the swing. A woman nearby, another parent I recognized from school, walked over and said she'd seen that clip online. She called it unfortunate. I forced a laugh and said people need hobbies. She smiled politely and walked away. When Jonas came back with Liam, I tried to act unbothered. I said, "People are still talking. Can you believe that?" He said, "Why wouldn't they? You gave them something to talk about." I said he could at least defend me. He said quietly, "You want me to lie for you?" I told him that wasn't fair. He said, "No, what's not fair is pretending this didn't happen." Then he stood and called to Liam that it was time to go. On the drive home, Liam hummed to himself in the back seat. I stared out the window, biting my lip. When we stopped at a red light, he said softly, "Mom, are you mad at Dad?" I said no. He said, "Then why don't you sit close to him anymore?" I didn't answer. Jonas reached out and turned up the radio just enough to fill the silence. That night, I made dinner and tried to keep things light. I told a few jokes, laughed too much at my own voice. Jonas ate quietly, nodding sometimes but not smiling. When I asked if he wanted dessert, he said no thanks. I asked if we could talk afterward. He said, "About what?" I said, "About us." He said, "I think we've both said enough." I couldn't take it anymore. I said he was punishing me by acting calm, that he was trying to make me feel guilty instead of just forgiving me. He looked up then, his eyes flat. "You keep talking about forgiveness like you earned it." I said I didn't deserve this kind of treatment, that no marriage is perfect. He said, "Some mistakes don't come with second chances." I said he was overreacting. He said, "You keep calling consequences overreactions." He stood up and carried his plate to the sink. As he turned away, I saw the open laptop on the counter again. A calendar reminder blinked faintly in the corner. Downtown 10:15. I asked what that was. He said, "An appointment." I asked with who. He said, "You'll find out soon enough." Then he closed the screen. After he went upstairs, I sat at the table for a long time, staring at the dark window. I could see my reflection. Me, alone in a bright kitchen, pretending I was still in control. I picked up my phone to call Nina, but stopped. What could I say? That my husband was making lists about our marriage, that I was afraid of something I couldn't name. When I finally went to bed, Jonas was already asleep in the guest room again. I lay awake listening to the faint sound of rain starting outside. Around midnight, Liam's door creaked. He padded down the hall and whispered, "Mum, is Dad moving out?" I said no, of course not. He said, "He looks like he's getting ready to." I told him to go back to bed, that everything was fine. But even as I said it, I didn't believe myself. When Liam's footsteps faded, I heard another sound, the soft rustle of paper being folded in the guest room, drawers opening and closing carefully, the steady rhythm of someone packing in silence. The muted buzz of a phone vibrates against the nightstand, a calendar alert, lighting up the words, "Downtown 10:15, confirmed." By Monday morning, the house felt too clean. Every surface shined, every paper stacked. Jonas had left early again, but his order lingered like something rehearsed. On the counter sat a row of labeled folders, household, accounts, schedule. I flipped one open but found only typed lists, dates, notes about bills, and Liam's school forms. Nothing emotional, nothing written by a husband trying to save his marriage. Just records. I called Nina, hoping she'd talk me down. She said she'd seen Jonas at her office last week. He'd stopped by to ask about financial templates for personal planning. I laughed, said that sounded paranoid, but she didn't laugh with me. She said he looked calm, like someone finishing a project. That word, finishing, stuck in my head all morning. When Jonas came home that evening, I told him we needed to talk properly. He said, "We are talking." I said, "No, I mean about us." He said, "This is us, a conversation you control until it turns ugly." I told him he was twisting everything, that I was trying to make things right. He said, "You only try when you're scared." I snapped that fear means I still care. He said quietly, "Maybe it means you care about losing." I didn't know what to say after that. He turned to go upstairs and I followed him. I asked if he still loved me. He said, "Love and trust aren't the same." I said, "But you haven't stopped loving me." He said, "I've stopped trusting the person who keeps testing me." The calm in his voice felt worse than any anger. At dinner, I forced normalcy. I asked Liam about school, told him his father was just busy. Jonas nodded without correcting me. When Liam went to bed, I lingered at the table, hoping Jonas would sit down too. Instead, he gathered the plates, washed them, and disappeared into his study. A few minutes later, I heard the faint sound of a printer starting up again. I walked to the door and asked what he was doing. He said, "Sorting paperwork." I asked if it was about work. He said, "It's about closure." I tried to joke, asked if he was writing a goodbye letter. He didn't answer, just picked up one of the printed pages and slipped it into a folder marked private. When I couldn't stand the silence, I said, "I miss when we used to laugh." He said, "So do I." Then he added, "But laughter means something different when it's used to humiliate someone." I told him I never meant to humiliate him, that I was just being myself. He said, "You're confusing self-expression with cruelty." I started crying then, but even my tears sounded rehearsed. He handed me a box of tissues without looking up. I asked if this was what he wanted, for me to fall apart. He said, "I don't want that, I just want peace." Later that night, I went through his drawers while he showered. I found more notes, all dated and precise, copies of bills, schedules, phone records. It looked like evidence, though for what, I didn't know. My chest tightened. When I heard the shower stop, I shoved everything back and sat on the bed, pretending to scroll my phone. He came in, glanced at me and said, "You don't have to keep pretending." I said, "Pretending what?" He said that this can go back to before. I told him he was being cruel now, that I'd admitted it was wrong, that I'd tried to fix it. He said, "You've only tried to rewrite it." I shouted that he was cold, that no one else would put up with him. He said softly, "Then we'll both be free." That stopped me. I didn't understand what free meant until he closed the folder and placed it neatly on the desk. "I'll handle this properly," he said. His tone was final, not angry, not emotional, just finished. I stood frozen, watching him gather his things into a single neat stack. I followed him to the door, begging him to tell me what he meant. He said, "You'll find out soon." Then he looked back once and added, "Don't call anyone until you do." When the door closed behind him, I realized the printer was still humming softly, spitting out another page, one I hadn't seen before. I walked closer, heart racing. The paper slid out face down. On the back corner, in small typed letters, was one word, petition. The printer stops mid-page, beeping softly as Jonas's voice from outside drifts in through the open window. "It's time to handle this properly." Tuesday morning arrived too bright, the kind of light that feels cruel. Jonas hadn't come home the night before. His side of the bed stayed untouched, his pillow cold. I waited, pacing the kitchen, checking the driveway every few minutes. Nothing. By noon, I convinced myself he'd gone to work early. I called his phone. No answer. I left a message saying we needed to stop acting like strangers. Still silence. I thought about driving to his office, but something held me back. Maybe pride, maybe fear of what I'd find. When Liam came home from school, he asked why Dad's car wasn't in the garage. I said he was busy, just like yesterday. He nodded but didn't look convinced. He went upstairs to play, and I sat at the table, staring at the folders Jonas had left. I kept telling myself I should throw them away, but my hands wouldn't move. Around 3, a notification buzzed on my phone. A reminder synced from Jonas's shared calendar. Downtown 10:15, confirmed. The time had passed hours ago. My chest tightened. What was downtown? What had he confirmed? By 4, I couldn't take it anymore. I called Nina, told her everything felt wrong. She said, "If he said he'd handle it properly, Iris, maybe you should take that seriously." I asked what that meant. She hesitated before saying, "Sometimes people stop talking because they're done explaining." That phrase stayed with me all the way downtown. Traffic crawled, and every light turned red. My reflection in the windshield looked ghostly. When I finally parked, I saw Jonas across the street. standing near the courthouse steps, talking to a man in a dark suit. The man handed him a folder. Jonas thanked him, shook his hand, and started walking toward the plaza. My pulse pounded in my ears. I called out his name, but he didn't stop. I ran after him, ignoring the people who turned to look. When he finally turned around, his expression was calm, tired. "You shouldn't be here," he said. I demanded to know what was going on, what he was doing downtown. He said, "You'll find out soon enough." Then he nodded toward the front doors. "They'll be with you shortly." Before I could ask what he meant, a woman in a neat blazer approached. She asked, "Mrs. Calder?" I said yes. She held out an envelope. "You've been served." For a second, I didn't understand. The world went quiet. I looked at the envelope, official seal, my name printed cleanly across the front. "What is this?" I whispered. She said, "Divorce petition and temporary custody orders." Then she walked away. I felt my throat close. "Jonas," I said, my voice breaking, "you can't be serious." He said, "I told you I'd handle it properly." I laughed, a small, frantic sound. "You're doing this here, in public?" He said, "This isn't about humiliation. It's about ending something you turned into a performance." People were passing by, glancing at us, whispering. My hands shook so hard the envelope bent. I said this was insane, that we could still fix it. He said, "I spent months fixing things you didn't notice were broken." I told him he was just angry, that lawyers only made things worse. He said, "You made it worse the moment you stopped caring who saw you." Behind him, I saw Diana walking toward us with Liam beside her. She must have met him nearby. Liam's eyes were wide, confused. I told him it was just grown-up stuff, nothing serious. He looked at Jonas and asked, "Are you leaving us?" Jonas knelt down so he was level with him. "No," he said softly. "I'm just making sure we both have peace." The words landed heavy. I said he couldn't use Liam as an excuse for this. Jonas stood up and looked at me. "This isn't about excuses. It's about consequences." I felt people watching, strangers, co-workers, maybe even family. Someone raised a phone. I heard the faint click of a camera shutter. I wanted to scream, to make them all stop. "Jonas," I said, desperate now, "you're throwing everything away for one stupid night, one mistake." He said, "No, I'm protecting what's left." I opened the envelope, my hands trembling. The words blurred, but I saw enough. Petition for dissolution of marriage, temporary custody arrangements, financial division. It was all so official, so final. I said I couldn't believe he would do this without even talking to me. He said, "You stopped listening a long time ago." I took a step closer, lowering my voice. "You can't really want to end this." He looked at me. Not with anger, not even sadness, just quiet certainty. "I want peace," he said again. Diana put her arm around Liam, steering him away. I wanted to pull him back, to make them stay, but I couldn't move. My legs felt heavy, my throat dry. "Please," I whispered, "don't do this here." He said, "There's nowhere else left." The woman in the blazer returned, confirming he'd already signed his part. "We'll contact you about next steps, Mrs. Calder," she said politely. I couldn't even respond. Jonas took one last look at me, then at Liam, who was watching from a few steps away. He gave him a small nod, not a wave, just acknowledgement, and started walking toward the street. I called after him again, but he didn't turn around this time. The sound of his shoes against the pavement was steady, unhurried, like someone who had already made peace with his choice. People nearby whispered, their voices soft but sharp. One of them said, "That's her, the one from the video." I felt the blood drain from my face. I turned toward the courthouse glass and saw my reflection. Messy hair, trembling hands, eyes wide like a child's. I didn't look like the woman who laughed too loud at that party. I looked like someone who'd finally run out of charm. The wind picked up, catching the edges of the papers as I clutched them to my chest. One loose sheet slipped free and fluttered to the ground. I bent to grab it, but it blew farther down the steps, landing near the bottom. Printed across the top in bold letters, temporary custody, minor child, Liam Calder. I froze. Jonas didn't look back. Diana reached for Liam's hand, guiding him toward their car. I tried to call his name, but my voice came out as a whisper swallowed by traffic. The door shut, the engine started, and they were gone. I stood there, clutching the papers, watching the plaza empty around me. The air smelled faintly of rain and exhaust. Somewhere nearby, another camera clicked, quick, unkind. The final page fluttered once more, then settled at my feet. I didn't pick it up. I just stared at it, realizing this was how it ended. Not with shouting, not with tears, but with signatures and silence. And as the courthouse doors closed behind him, I understood what Jonas meant when he said he'd handle it properly. It wasn't revenge. It was order, the kind I never believed he had the strength to find until now. Don't forget to hit like, subscribe, and turn on the bell so you don't miss the next story. Write in the comments from which city you are watching.